segment, we're going to talk a little bit about trailing arms. In this particular case, this is probably the trailing arm assembly that's currently on your car right now, and this is probably what it looks like. You can send your trailing arms to VBP, and we'll remanufacture these things from beginning to end. When you get them back, you'll get them back completely rebuilt with bearing assemblies, put new shields on it, put polyurethane bushings, the stock size that came on the car. So when it's returned to you, it's ready for installation and ready to go. You can either have the original equipment arm if you like. In this particular case, these are just made out of sheet metal. Or you can upgrade your car with our offset trailing arm, which are very heavy duty. And I'm going to let Chris McDonald talk a little bit about those because he's installed these on his car, and these are the state of the art. These are the best ones that you can purchase for your car. Chris?
Sure, thank you, Paul. This is the offset trailing arm, and as you can see, the difference between it and the stock trailing arm is this actual cutout that's in the front portion here. But the difference is obvious in this shot here. You can see the frame rail of the vehicle, and you can see the trailing arm area. This allows that much wider wheel and tire to come all the way up into this space, which is impossible to do on a stock arm. The trailing arms are heavy duty. They're made out of the thicker material. It'll allow you to put more horsepower down, really pretty much as you want to put on it. It'll hold that. Also, one of the great benefits is the trailing arm comes pre-assembled with all of the braking assembly already in it. Everything ready to go, so all you have to do is put it on. The kit also comes with stainless steel shims, and if you've ever looked at the shims that come in your stock car, they're about as rusty as that right there. So this gives your alignment shop a nice fresh set to start out with, as well as the trailing arm bolts, which will typically rust, or you may have had to cut them out to remove the old ones, and this gives you a fresh set of bolts with the entire set. All of that comes with it, so it makes for a nice installation, everything new and fresh.
And you can order it with or without slotted rotors. So, Chris, what about these rear trailing arm assemblies? How difficult do they take off?
Well, they're not too bad, but age, corrosion, and time can affect how easily they come out. A couple things that you'll need to remove. You're basically taking this entire assembly out of the vehicle here. You first want to take an 11/16 and a 5/8 wrench and remove your shock. You'll need a 3/4 to remove the bottom of the shock. On the back of the shock, what's holding the strut, the shock mount in, there'll be a 15/16 nut and a Carter key you'll need to pull. It's usually going to be frozen and difficult to remove. This would also be a good time to replace that, so instead of spending a lot of time trying to very carefully remove it, you could go ahead and just knock that on out. If you damage the threads, that'll be okay. Back on your sway bar mount, you'll need 9/16 wrench to remove your sway bar. You also need to remove your actual rear spring. It has a 7/8 and a 13/16 nut that's on there. That's going to be everything loose. Sway bar is loose. Take your brake lines loose. You're going to go to this bolt right here. This is the actual main trailing arm bolt. It's held in with a 11/16 and a 5/8 head on the bolt and 11/16 on the nut. When this is in the car, there's not a lot of room, so you have to reach up inside from both sides to loosen it. You can get access to here fairly easily. You can get that open. Couple ways to remove this. If everything's well lubricated and in pretty good shape, you can usually put a large bar on here and hit this with a hammer and drive it out. If you're successful doing that, you can pull it out the rest of the way. If you're not successful and this is frozen, don't be alarmed. You'll be getting a new bolt with the kit anyhow. And the way to get around that would be to take a Sawzall and slip it in here and very carefully cut each side of the bolt, and you can pull the trailing arm out. We've removed the shocks, we've removed the struts, we've removed the spring, calipers, and the brake lines. Our next process here is to remove the half shaft. The best way to remove the half shaft for our purposes is to take the bolts that go into the flange right into the side of the spindle. You'll do that with a 5/8 socket, and Danny is prepared to remove those right now. There are 4 bolts on that flange to hold it in. They're fine thread. Take a few turns to get them out. Once it's removed, you can see the flange nut. The flange nut's held in by a pin. You'll need to pull this pin, nut, and retain the flange to replace on the new trailing arms. Right now, Danny's removing the emergency brake cable from the brake assembly. It attaches by that lever into the brake assembly. It's held on by 2 other
mounting points onto the trailing arm, and it goes down into the chassis of the car from that point.
You have your shims in here. You'll remove your shims and the pin that holds them in place. And at that point in time, this entire assembly will come down out of the car.
Once the trailing arm is out, you're going to need to take your old axle flange off. You'll do that by removing the pin that's in the castle nut. You can do that with a pair of side cutters. And then this is a 15/16 nut that you'll need to remove. What I recommend you do is take a piece of pipe or a pry bar of some sort and wedge that into the threads of the spindle, and that will allow you to hold that still while you remove this nut. This nut's going to be under a lot of torque, a lot of pressure. It's going to take a bit of muscle to get it off, but as soon as you break this free, you're going to want to retain the nut and the spindle, the axle flange for your new trailing arm. What we've done is we now have our new offset trailing arm ready to go. We've transferred our axle flange over, the axle flange washer, and the new trailing arm actually does come with a new axle flange nut. We recommend torquing it down to 100 foot-pounds and then lining it up with the nearest keyway and getting that set up. So we're going to get going now. Again, this offset trailing arm is going to allow us the flexibility of not only being able to handle more horsepower and handle more aggressive driving or more extreme situations, but with the offset design here, we can put a much larger tire. And Danny, you know, in my car, actually, I've got flares like this, but I'm also running a 12-inch ride rim with 335/30s in the back. So with a 5-inch offset, which this really lets me get that in there, and this is the only way I could pull it off.
That's right, Chris. Do you think that's about the maximum probably width you could get in there, or do you think you could get more?
Actually, you could get a little bit more if you did not use a sway bar. But in my car, I'm keeping the sway bar, and I'm right at 5 inches. But you could easily go 5.5-inch back spacing, and no problem at all if you didn't run a sway bar. So you've got a lot of flexibility with this. Again, Danny, one of the other beauties of this, you know, is that everything's in here ready to go. It's assembled. The bearing's in it. The trailing arm is in it. Our rotor's already set up. Our parking brake is already assembled. Everything in here is set, including the new bushing at the very end of it. This is a complete unit. There's no guesswork. We're going to put it in, and it's probably going to last the life of this car no matter how hard we drive it.
That's right, Chris. Out of the box and on your car.
All right. Let's go ahead and put this in.
Okay.
Now, before we do, one last thing we'll mention. Obviously, we are going to go with the new trailing arm bolt. We did take our old shims out. We measured them, and we've matched up brand new stainless steel shims provided by Vet Brakes and Products, and we've labeled them towards the outside and inside so